Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room buzzed with the sound of clipped military chatter, projector fans, and the clatter of coffee mugs. Officers, contractors, and shooters filled every seat but one, the one in the back where she sat, silent, half in shadow. Norah Hale didn't belong here, not according to them. Her gray maintenance jacket looked like a mistake among the desert tans and pressed uniforms. Her hands were smudged with grease, not gunpowder. Her eyes, though, steady, distant, like she was measuring something invisible, didn't look like a mistake at all. Lieutenant Grant was at the front, pointing to a slide glowing on the wall. 3 moving targets, combat velocity, crosswinds at 250 meters. The new ballistic software predicts a 60% hit rate. Today's test will confirm that. Laughter rippled softly through the room, confident, practiced. These were the professionals, the shooters, the people whose names appeared on reports, whose photos ended up in defense magazines. Norah took notes anyway, not for them, for herself. Her pen scratched over her weathered notebook, small precise symbols filling the page. 250 m, 12 ms, crosswind northeast bias 6 knots, variance 0.35 mil, gate hesitation 1.2 sec. Her handwriting was neat, mechanical, like she'd written it 1,000 times before. When she raised her hand, Grant didn't see it. Or maybe he did and pretended not to. "Sir," she tried again, quiet but clear. "Wind shifted at dawn. Your morning data's off." He didn't look up from his tablet. "We'll hear from actual shooters, thank you." A few chuckles followed. Norah's hand lowered. Her jaw didn't move, but the line of her shoulders tightened. "They'll miss all of them," she murmured, not a prediction, just math. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped, and conversation flooded the narrow hallway outside. Norah stayed seated until the crowd thinned. Then she stood, notebook tucked under her arm, and stepped out into the dry, rising heat. The desert stretched for miles, a colorless ocean of dust and glare. Range Delta, a private military testing ground, looked like a city built from steel and sand. Towers, wind flags, target rails, armored trailers, every structure bleached by sun and silence. Norah walked the perimeter fence, the same path she took every morning, not for exercise, for calibration. Every 100 meters she stopped, lifted a handheld anemometer, noted readings. 3 knots at ground level, 5 at tower height. A 2-knot differential meant one thing: crosswind drift at long range, enough to ruin perfect math. She wrote each figure down. Then she just stood there a moment, eyes closed, feeling the current on her face. The way the wind pressed, shifted, whispered against her cheek to her, it spoke louder than any briefing. No music, no comms chatter, just the hum of the desert and her boots crunching gravel. By the time the sun cracked over the mountains, she was back inside the maintenance shed, her world of metal and precision. Tools hung in neat rows. A disassembled bipod, a jeweler's scale, a cracked anemometer waiting for recalibration. On the far wall, a single piece of masking tape held a note written in black ink. "Measure twice, lead once." Below it, an old photograph. 5 soldiers in desert fatigues, faces sunburned, smiling through exhaustion. Norah's younger self among them, 4 others. One circled in red, "Read." She didn't linger on it. She never did. Just one glance, like checking a wound she already knew would ache. She turned to the bench, adjusting a sensor with a tiny screwdriver. 2 quarter turns. Perfect. No fanfare, no applause, just numbers aligning again. That was her comfort, where everything made sense. Later that morning, she crossed the compound toward the firing range. The shooters were already out, joking and stretching, their rifles glinting under the growing sun. "Hey, wrench girl," one called out. "Got any WD-40 for my trigger?" Another laughed. "Maybe she can fix my scope after I nail all 3. Norah didn't reply. She didn't even glance at them. Her eyes, though, they noticed everything. The slight limp in the first shooter's left knee would throw off stance. The way another held his coffee cup with the wrong hand, shoulder compensation, likely an old wound. Tiny details. They told her stories these men would never admit. She reached the track, a steel rail cutting across the dirt where the robot targets would run. Kneeling, she brushed sand aside, fingers tracing the line. There, a small divot at the 400-meter mark, barely visible, but she felt it. That was the problem. That would cause a split-second hesitation in the target's gait. Nobody else had noticed. Nobody ever checked the system. They just blamed the shooter when the hit didn't land. She pulled out her notebook, sketched the rail, marked the flaw, quietly, precisely. Behind her, a voice called out, sharp, impatient. "Maintenance, clear the line." She stood, brushed the dust from her knees, and stepped back behind the rope without protest. A defense contractor in a suit glanced her way, smirked. "She fixing targets or serving coffee?" "Same thing," said the range supervisor. Laughter followed. Norah's right hand slipped into her jacket pocket, closing around the brass shell casing she always carried, warm from her body heat. Its engraving pressed into her skin. 36, 73 degrees N, 119, 4,179 degrees WTWW. And a name, Reed. Her voice was silent, but the thought was clear. "We'll do it right this time." By 11, the observation tower was packed. Cameras, officers, defense contractors, all here for the big test. 13 shooters stood on the firing line, rifles ready, pride sharpened to a point. Colonel Mason's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "Gentlemen, this isn't about ego. This is about capability. 3 moving targets, combat velocity, 1,250 meters." He paused, scanning the crowd. "The software says it's achievable. Let's see if the human factor agrees." Shooter 1 stepped forward. Veteran sniper, 47 confirmed kills, calm, confident. Target launched. A blur of steel and sand. He fired. Miss, forward 1 meter. Shooter 2, miss. Shooter 3, miss. Each failure landed heavier than the last. By the 7th, even the contractors were whispering. The math was wrong, the wind too unpredictable, the robots erratic, excuses came easy. Norah stood 30 meters back, behind the safety rope, notebook open, spotting scope borrowed from the armory. Her pencil moved in rhythm with each shot. S1 lead too short. S2 overcorrected for mirage. S3 gate stutter missed. S4 wind drift underestimated. She saw patterns no one else could. They weren't missing because they were bad. They were missing because they weren't looking. Shooter 10 stepped up, younger, determined. He double-checked his numbers, inhaled deeply, fired, miss. He slammed his fist against the mat. "This is impossible." By the 13th miss, silence blanketed the range. The desert wind hummed softly through the tension. Colonel Mason's jaw flexed. His eyes scanned the firing line, the tower, the maintenance crew in the back. Then his voice, hard and cutting, split the air. "Can anybody here actually shoot?" It was a question, but it sounded like a verdict. Every head turned when laughter broke the stillness. Lieutenant Grant smirked, gesturing toward the rope line. "Who let maintenance into this line?" The joke rippled through the crowd, nervous, mocking. "She fixes targets," someone said, "doesn't hit them." Norah felt their eyes on her, dozens of them. She didn't step back, didn't flinch. Instead, she took 1 step forward. "May I try, sir?" The words landed like a stone, dropped into water. Ripples of disbelief followed. Grant blinked. "You're serious?" "She's a technician," Rodriguez said flatly. "No combat quals, no certification, waste of time." But Mason didn't laugh. He studied her, really studied her. 13 trained professionals had just failed. What did he have to lose? Ms. Hale, he said, his voice even, almost cautious, you understand the parameters. Yes, sir. She opened her notebook, pages filled with equations, angles, drift margins, and wind corrections. The current wind is 5 to 6 knots northeast, gusting to 8. Mirage indicates 0.9-meter drift midrange. Targets have a hesitation at 1.2-second intervals due to track damage at 400 meters. At 12 meters per second and 90-degree crossing angle, that's a 2.7 to 2.9 mil lead. Elevation 7.3 for the 338 Lapua Magnum. The crowd went silent. Grant's smirk vanished. Even Mason raised an eyebrow. That's very specific, he said. It's just observation, sir, Norah replied, and physics. A contractor in a tailored suit muttered, let her try. One more failure won't hurt the data set. Mason hesitated, then a nod. One attempt, Ms. Hale, same rules. Norah stepped over the rope line. Her boots pressed into the sand with deliberate calm. The murmurs behind her grew quieter, not respect yet, just curiosity. She picked up the unfamiliar rifle, checked the bolt chamber optics. Her hands were steady, her heartbeat slowed 58 beats per minute. She felt the wind against her cheek, a faint, invisible pulse from the northeast. 6 knots, steady. The world narrowed. No audience, no laughter. Just numbers and movement. The loudspeaker crackled. Target sequence initiating in 3, 2, 1. The first robot burst from cover, sprinting left to right at full speed. She didn't chase it. She waited, reticle fixed ahead, calculating its path before it even crossed it. Then, at exactly 1.2 seconds, where she knew it would hesitate, she squeezed the trigger. A sharp crack. 3.7 seconds of flight. Then clang. Hit center mass. The scoreboard blinked once, then changed. 1/3 hit. Gasps. Someone whispered, lucky shot. Norah didn't answer, didn't even look up. She was already chambering the second round. How do you measure silence? Maybe by the weight it carries, the kind that hangs in the air right before something changes forever. Norah Hale didn't look up. Her world had narrowed to breath, wind, and distance, a universe inside a rifle scope. The first shot was already gone, echo fatting over range delta. One hit, one truth, the math was sound. Her fingers worked automatically, bolt up, back, forward, down, chambering the next round with the calm precision of a clock resetting itself. Around her the crowd murmured in disbelief, heads craning, officers trading glances. They'd all seen the hit, no one could explain it. Except her. The wind whispered again against her cheek, 6 knots steady. She adjusted her hold, 0.1 mil right, tiny, invisible correction. Target 2 launched. Right to left this time, sunlight cutting across its steel surface, heat shimmer warping the air at 800 meters. Most shooters would fire fast, trusting instinct. Norah waited. Patience wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. The robot hit the divot at 400 meters. That half-second wobble, she'd mapped it, memorized it, trusted it. Trigger pull smooth, breath steady. Fire. Another crack split the desert. Then clang. Upper center mass. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was recognition, a shift so subtle it felt like the air itself had changed density. 2 for 2. She exhaled slowly, emptied the last casing, and reached for her third. Colonel Mason's voice over the loudspeaker faltered slightly before finding itself again. Target 3, center lane, full velocity. This one was different, hardest of the set, deepest cover, shortest window. It would move faster than the others, no pattern to predict except one. That same 1.2-second hesitation, born of a flaw in the track no one had bothered to fix. Norah's breathing slowed, 56 beats per minute. Her thumb brushed the familiar scar along the rifle stock, same motion every time, an unconscious ritual. She could almost hear Reed's voice beside her again, teasing through memory. You think too much before you shoot, Hale. And you don't think enough, Reed. He'd laughed at that once. Now the memory came quiet, like wind through broken glass. Target sequence initiating, the loudspeaker intoned. 3, 2, 1. The final robot exploded from cover. Fast, erratic, kicking dust. Norah tracked it just long enough to confirm its rhythm, then let the math take over. Wind 6 knots northeast, gust 7. Lead 2.95 mils, elevation 7.4, fire window 0.3 seconds. Her world slowed, heartbeat stretching between seconds. At 1.2 seconds, the target hit the divot and Norah squeezed. 3.8 seconds of silence. Then clang. Dead center. 3 for 3. The scoreboard blinked green. Complete, complete, complete. Sound came back like a flood, voices, boots scuffing, the mechanical clack of disbelief. But Norah stayed still, her cheek lifting from the rifle stock with deliberate calm. She flipped the safety on, stood, and set the weapon down as if placing a fragile truth back on a shelf. Colonel Mason stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on the scoreboard, then on her. How? He said, voice low but carrying in the desert stillness. Norah looked at him, not defiant, not proud, just steady. The targets weren't erratic, sir. They were consistent. Everyone hit a track divot at 400 meters. Each hesitation lasted 1.2 seconds. That's the predictable moment. Most shooters were firing mid-stride. Mason frowned, and the wind shifted from 4 knots this morning to 6, northeast quartering. At 1250 meters, that's 0.4 mil drift. I held left. Her tone was flat, not arrogance, just data. Lieutenant Morrison muttered, You memorized all that. No, Norah said, I measured it. Laughter didn't follow this time. A defense contractor, expensive watch glinting, pushed forward with a tablet in hand. You're Hale, he said suddenly, the one who wrote the moving target lead tables for West Annex. Norah nodded once. The same Hale who rebuilt the crosswind calibration protocols after the Reed incident. The name hung in the air like static. Everyone went quiet, even the wind seemed to pause. Yes, she said softly, Reed was my partner. Colonel Mason's brow furrowed. You mean the Red who? Killed by a bad model, Norah finished for him. The simulation said the shot was achievable. It was, I knew it, but I didn't say stop. Her hand went to her pocket, to the brass casing she'd carried ever since. He took that shot, she whispered. I wrote the numbers that led him. He died because I didn't speak up. No one moved. It wasn't guilt she radiated. It was accountability, heavy and honest. After a long silence, she continued. So I rewrote everything, every table, every formula, every margin of error. I made sure no one else would die trusting bad math. Mason nodded slowly. Understanding replaced curiosity in his eyes. You saved this entire program, he said. Norah shook her head. I tried to save one person first. The wind picked up again, tugging at her jacket, carrying the scent of gun oil and dust. When the applause started, it was hesitant, one clap, then another. Then it spread, not mocking this time. Respectful, earnest. Mason raised a hand. Attention, he barked. The sound cracked across the range. Every soldier, contractor and civilian instinctively straightened. Effective immediately, he said, voice echoing through the desert. Norah Hale is reinstated as Range Delta's technical advisor for all moving target protocols. When she speaks, you listen. When she says stop, you stop. When she says recalibrate, you recalibrate. A long pause. He looked at her again. "Welcome back, Miss Hale." She didn't smile, not yet. But the air around her felt lighter, as if something inside her, something that had been locked for years, had shifted loose. She took out the brass casing, turned it between her fingers, its engraving catching the sunlight. 36, 73 degrees N, 119, 4,179 degrees W. She whispered to no one in particular, "We did it right this time, Reed." 2 hours later, the crowd had thinned. The cameras gone, the voices faded. The desert was itself again, vast, quiet, endless. Norah sat at her workbench, disassembling the rifle she'd just used. Not her weapon, but she treated it like one, cleaning the bolt, wiping the barrel, returning each part to its place. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn until the voice came, hesitant, young, guilty. "Ms. Hale." Lieutenant Grant, the same man who'd laughed earlier. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, helmet under one arm. Norah kept cleaning, eyes down. "I laughed at you," he said. "At the meeting, at the firing line. I dismissed you because of your position, not your knowledge. That was wrong." "You didn't know," Norah replied quietly. "I should have asked." Grant exhaled, rubbed his neck. "I've been shooting 8 years, 2 deployments. I thought I understood wind. You saw something in seconds I missed in hours." Norah finally looked up. Her gaze wasn't hard, just tired, measured. "You were looking at the target," she said. "I was looking at the system." Grant hesitated. "Will you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "How to read it like you do. How to see what everyone else misses." She studied him. No bravado now, just sincerity. "Tuesday 600. Bring a notebook, not a rifle." He blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "And leave your rank outside. Mathematics doesn't care about lieutenant bars." Later others came. Rodriguez, Kowalski, even Morrison, the youngest, still red with embarrassment. All asked the same thing, "Teach us." Norah looked at them, the same men who mocked her that morning, and saw humility. The kind that only failure creates. "I'll teach," she said. "But understand this, I'm not teaching you to be better killers. I'm teaching you to waste fewer bullets." They frowned, not quite following. "Every round you don't fire because you know it won't hit," she said, "is a life you might save. Yours or someone else." Kowalski, the oldest, nodded first. "After today, I'll learn any way you want to teach it." And that was that. That evening, Colonel Mason called her to his office. The walls were lined with data sheets, wind models, test reports, all the things that made Range Delta run like a machine. He sat behind his desk, a man built from discipline and fatigue. "Sit down, Ms. Hale." He slid a folder across the desk. The header read, "Department of Defense, Official Reinstatement Order." "Effective immediately," Mason said. "You're reinstated as lead ballistician, Range Delta, GS-12 pay grade, full authority." Norah flipped through the pages. Her name, her title, her signature line. There was power in those words, but she didn't smile. "There's a condition," she said. Mason arched a brow. "Name it." "I don't create doctrine for PR. I don't fudge data for contracts. And if I say a test is dangerous, we stop, even if it's embarrassing, even if it costs money." Mason leaned back, a slow nod. "Agreed." "And one more thing," she added, pulling her notebook from her jacket. "I want the Reed files, all of them. The original models, the investigation, the after-action reports, unredacted." Mason's expression softened. "Why?" "Because Reed died trusting a system that lied. I want to find every place where that lie still lives before someone else pays for it." He didn't speak for a while, then quietly, "I'll have them on your desk by morning." Norah signed the order with her small, precise engineer's handwriting. As she rose to leave, Mason asked one last question. "Why'd you come back, Hale? After Reed, after everything, you could have left." She paused at the door. Her hand brushed the brass casing in her pocket. Because he'd want the math fixed, she said softly. Not revenge, not blame, just the truth corrected. Outside, the desert was cooling into evening. The sky burned orange and purple. Norah walked the empty path back to the maintenance shed, her boots crunching against gravel, her shadow long across the sand. Each step sounded like a heartbeat, steady, controlled, alive. And somewhere in the quiet wind, a whisper seemed to follow. Not all ghosts haunt, some calculate. Why do people only listen after failure? That question echoed in Norah's head as she walked the silent halls of Range Delta before dawn. The base was different now, quieter, not the silence of indifference but of anticipation. When systems shift, people feel it. They might not understand why, but they sense the gravity. And this morning, gravity had a name, Norah Hale. Her gray jacket still smelled faintly of oil and wind. Her hands carried the residue of both precision and guilt. But her pace, measured, certain, carried something else now, purpose. Inside the command trailer, Colonel Mason sat at his desk, coffee steaming beside a glowing monitor. When Norah entered, he looked up. No salute, no formalities, just acknowledgement. "They're waiting for you," he said. "Who?" Mason nodded toward the window. Outside, beyond the range's eastern hangar, a group of soldiers, 15 of them, stood in a loose semicircle, notebooks in hand. No rifles, no scopes, just paper, pens, and humility. Norah exhaled. "I didn't think they'd show." Mason smirked faintly. "After what you did out there, they'd show if you told them to crawl through broken glass." She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her weathered notebook and walked toward the door. The sun had barely broken the horizon. The wind flags along the perimeter snapped eastward, their movement rhythmic, steady. Perfect morning for measurement. Norah stopped a few feet from the group. They stiffened, unsure how to greet her. She didn't make it easy. "Put the notebooks away," she said. "You're not writing anything yet." Grant frowned. "Then what are we?" "Listening," she cut in, "to the wind." A few glances traded, half confusion, half discomfort. "The first lesson isn't about shooting," Norah continued, voice calm, steady. "It's about noticing, the kind of noticing that keeps people alive." She motioned toward the open desert. "You see that?" They looked. All they saw was dust and emptiness. "That's your teacher," she said, "not me." She stepped forward, boots crunching gravel, and held out her hand at shoulder height. The wind brushed her fingers. 5 knots northeast, ground level. Then she knelt, touched the sand. 3 at surface. The differential tells you turbulence. Turbulence tells you drift. Drift tells you truth. Kowalski raised an eyebrow. "You talk about wind like it's alive." "It is," Norah said softly. "You just don't respect it yet." By mid-morning, she had them spread across the range, one by the firing line, one by the tower, one near the target tracks. Each was told to measure without tools, just observation. She moved among them like a ghost, quiet, precise, correcting posture, questions, assumptions. "Don't chase the flag," she told Morrison. "It lags. Look at the dust, the heat shimmer, the grass blades. They tell you what's happening now." When Grant tried to measure drift by timing a moving vehicle in the distance, she shook her head. "You're collecting data, not meaning. Data without understanding is what killed Reed." He lowered his gaze. "Yes, ma'am." At noon, she called them all back. The desert shimmered, heat waves distorting everything like a mirage, appropriate, she thought, since that's what ego was, a distortion of truth. "Lesson 2, she said, "the difference between control and precision." Kowalski wiped sweat from his forehead. "Aren't they the same thing?" "No," Norah said. "Control is thinking you can force the shot to obey you. Precision is understanding you never could." They stared at her, silent. She looked back, unblinking, almost kind. "Most of you were trained to dominate your weapon," she said. But the bullet doesn't care who's pulling the trigger. It only cares about math. The wind doesn't care about rank. It doesn't care about your record. It moves how it wants. You either read it correctly or you miss. The world isn't defying you, it's instructing you. A pause, then quietly she added, precision isn't arrogance. It's humility disguised as skill. That night after the day's lesson, Norah returned to her maintenance shed. The workbench was neat, unnervingly so, everything in its place. She sat down, removed her notebook, and opened it to a page she hadn't touched in years. Read Incident, April 17, 2019. The ink had faded, but the numbers still screamed. Ballistic data, wind charts predicted trajectories. And one red circle, achievable 92%. She stared at that word, achievable. It had cost a man his life. She turned the page and began writing over it. New equations, new margins, new safety thresholds, each line an act of atonement. The clock ticked past midnight, her hands cramped, her eyes burned, still she wrote. At 01:37 she stopped. On the last page, she wrote a single sentence in careful script. Precision is compassion. Then she closed the notebook and finally, for the first time in years, slept without dreaming of gunfire. The next morning, Colonel Mason's email reached every terminal on base. Subject line, new protocol, precision first. Effective immediately. All personnel conducting moving target exercises will attend mandatory sessions led by lead ballistician Hale. Any test where Hale recommends stop or recalibrate will halt immediately. No exceptions. This range does not run on ego. It runs on precision. Mason J., Commanding Officer, Range Delta. When Norah walked across the compound later that morning, she could feel the difference. People didn't look through her anymore. They nodded, greeted her, moved aside as she passed. Respect not forced, not ordered but earned, 3 shots at a time. By afternoon, she stood before the memorial wall. Black granite polished, 73 names. Names of the ones who never came back. Her fingers found the one that mattered most. Read Michael J. Her hand pressed against the cool stone. I fixed it, Reed, she whispered. The model, the brackets, the data. Today, 13 shooters missed, but they went home. Nobody died believing a lie. She pulled the brass casing from her pocket. 6 years she'd carried it. Now she placed it gently in the small recess beneath Reed's name, among coins, patches, and badges left by others. I'm not carrying you anymore, she murmured. Not because I'm letting go, but because you're not a weight, you're a standard. She stepped back. The wind picked up, tugging at her jacket. The casing gleamed in the sun, a silent promise fulfilled. Footsteps behind her. Mason, off-duty fatigues, sleeves rolled, no insignia. I read both reports, he said quietly. The original and your revision. Norah didn't turn. Then you know the first one called it operator error. Yeah, he said. I know that was a lie. The model failed him, she said. Not his hands. Mason nodded slowly, staring at Reed's name. Then he handed her a manila envelope. The files you requested, he said, unredacted, plus 6 other cases labeled operator error. She frowned. Why? Because I want you to find every lie we told ourselves, Mason said. Every mistake we buried under bureaucracy. He paused, eyes on the wall. You taught me something, Hale with 3 bullets. If we lie about what killed our people, we'll keep killing them. The wind filled the silence, the kind of silence that meant truth had been spoken. The next morning, the briefing hall was packed. 50+ personnel, shooters, engineers, contractors, officers, standing room only. Mason stood at the podium. His voice carried authority but also something new, humility. 3 days ago, he began, some of you laughed. Today, all of you listen. He gestured toward Norah, who stepped forward. Gray jacket, hair pulled back, eyes calm, almost detached. But her presence filled the room. "I'm not a hero," she began. "I'm a technician who learned to measure carefully." A murmur, then silence. "The real heroes are on that wall outside," she continued. "They trusted us to give them accurate data. We failed them. That stops now." She looked across the crowd. No anger, just conviction. "I won't teach you to be dangerous. I'll teach you to be precise. Dangerous is loud, precise is quiet." She lifted her notebook, opened it to a blank page. Dangerous counts hits, precise counts lives saved. A young lieutenant raised his hand. "What if precision means missing opportunities?" Norah nodded slowly. "Then we miss opportunities, because I'd rather miss a shot than take the wrong one. Precision is compassion for everyone downrange." The room went still. You could almost hear the weight of those words settle into the concrete. She walked to the whiteboard and wrote 3 words in black marker. "When in doubt, don't shoot." "This isn't cowardice," she said. "It's discipline. Real operators know when to pull the trigger. Great ones know when not to." She closed her notebook. "Training starts Monday. 600. Bring humility. Leave ego behind. Every bullet you don't fire is a life you might save, yours, someone else's, or someone who hasn't even arrived here yet." Mason stepped forward, his voice steady. "From now on, this base operates differently. Technical safety isn't a suggestion, it's law. Hale's word on ballistics and risk assessment is final. She says stop, you stop. She says recalibrate, you recalibrate. No appeals, no exceptions." A long pause. Then Mason added quietly, "We don't measure success by rounds fired. We measure it in people who come home." No one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, but because silence felt like the only appropriate respect. Outside, the flag flapped in steady wind. The brass casing caught the morning light at the memorial's base. The same wind that once carried failure now carried promise. That night, as Range Delta settled under a pale blue dusk, Norah sat on the hood of a maintenance vehicle, staring toward the horizon. The desert stretched endless and unforgiving, but for once, she didn't feel small in it. Grant approached quietly, coffee in hand. "Ma'am," he said softly, offering her a cup. She accepted it. "Don't call me ma'am," she said, "just Norah." He smiled faintly, then just Grant. They sat in silence, watching the last traces of sunlight fade from the range. After a while, he said, "You really think precision can be compassion?" Norah took a sip, then nodded. "Compassion isn't about mercy. It's about accuracy. It's about caring enough to get it right." Grant thought about that, then he nodded too. And as the desert cooled, both sat quietly, the teacher and the student, listening to the soft hum of the wind that never lied. What happens when the quiet one starts to lead? For weeks, Range Delta had been transforming, not through orders or enforcement, but through gravity. A gravity named Norah Hale. Every morning at 600, she stood before rows of soldiers, contractors, and instructors, gray jacket against a sea of tan uniforms. The same woman they once ignored now drew crowds large enough to fill the observation hall. There were no PowerPoints, no speeches, just field notebooks and silence. She began each session the same way. "Breathe, then listen." The first lesson was always patience. The second, humility. The third, the hardest one, accountability. "You are not your hit count," she told them. "You are your correction curve. You are how you respond when the system fails, not when it works." At first, the younger ones didn't understand. They came expecting marksmanship lessons. What they got were lectures about math, ethics, and restraint. "Every shot you fire begins as an equation," Norah said, writing on a whiteboard already streaked with Venn diagrams. "But if your ego is part of that equation, your answer's already wrong." She looked at Grant, who was now one of her best students, and asked, "You know what a bad wind call costs?" He hesitated, a missed shot. Norah shook her head, a life. The room went still. Precision isn't numbers, she continued quietly. It's empathy expressed through math. It's saying, I will not let my ignorance kill anyone today. By the end of the month, Range Delta's entire doctrine had shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet like erosion, reshaping stone grain by grain. They called it the Hale Protocol, unofficially at first, whispered between range crews. Then it became official. New posters appeared in barracks and control rooms. When in doubt, don't shoot. Precision is compassion. Some called it revolutionary, others called it overcautious. But it worked. In the 4 weeks since her reinstatement, Range Delta recorded its first perfect safety streak in years. No accidental discharges, no faulty data tests, no unnecessary live-fire injuries. Mason noticed. He began stopping by her sessions more often, not as a commander, but as a listener. He'd stand at the back, arms crossed, absorbing every word like someone relearning an old truth they'd once known but forgotten. He never interrupted. Not once. It was during one of those quiet training mornings that a courier brought in a sealed envelope, stamped classified. Review request granted. Norah recognized the code immediately, the files she'd asked for. The ones tied to Reed's death. After the session, she sat alone in her new office, the one overlooking the range she used to maintain. The wind blew dust against the window pane, whispering at the edges of silence as she opened the envelope. Inside, 7 folders, each labeled with a name and the same cause of death, operator error. She flipped through the first. A Marine sniper, perfect record, died during crosswind trial. The model had predicted a 2-meter drift. Actual drift 5. Result fatal ricochet. Second file. Private contractor, test miscalibration. Killed during live demonstration. Cause, delayed target gate timing, the same mechanical flaw Norah had identified weeks ago. By the 5th file, her hands were trembling. All of it preventable. All of it written off. Not as mechanical error. Not as bad data. But as human fault. She closed her eyes, leaned back in her chair, and let the guilt roll over her like cold water. For a long time she didn't move. Then she reached for her notebook, turned to a blank page and began writing again. She wrote like someone digging up bones that should never have been buried. If math can kill, then math must also heal. Line after line filled the page. She was rewriting truth itself, the quiet kind that doesn't earn medals, only ghosts forgiveness. Later that evening, Mason found her still there, the lamplight cutting through the dark office like a scalpel. He leaned against the doorframe. You've been here since dawn. Almost done, she said. Her voice was low, even the tone of someone who'd accepted her own exhaustion as the price of progress. Mason studied her, then asked, You ever rest, Hale? She smiled faintly. I'll rest when the models stop lying. He nodded slowly, then placed something on her desk, a coffee mug with the Range Delta insignia. I had your name etched on it, he said. Lead ballistician officially. She ran her finger along the letters, then looked up. Don't make me into something I'm not. What's that? A legend. He frowned slightly. I'm not. I'm making you the baseline. She tilted her head. The baseline. Yeah, he said quietly. From now on, before we run any test, any mission, we ask one question. What would Hale say? And if we can't answer, we don't proceed. Her eyes flickered surprise, maybe even discomfort. That's too much weight, she said. Mason's reply was simple. It's the right weight. He turned toward the door, then paused. Reed carried bad data because we gave it to him. You carried his death because we let you. Now, we carry the responsibility together. She didn't speak, she just nodded. Some weights you don't drop, you redistribute. The next morning, a convoy arrived. Cameras, reporters, representatives from the Defense Oversight Board. They'd come to observe the new training doctrine, to see if the Hale method could replace legacy systems across all federal ranges. Mason had warned her the night before. "They're coming for headlines," he said. "You don't have to impress them." "I won't," Norah said. "Math doesn't perform for cameras." And she meant it. The demonstration began at noon. Wind 7 knots from northeast. Visibility, heat shimmer moderate. Firing line, 6 shooters, 3 veterans, 3 recruits. Norah stood beside them, no rifle in hand, just her notebook. A defense board member leaned toward Mason, muttering, "Where's her equipment?" Mason smiled faintly. "You'll see." Norah knelt beside the youngest recruit, a nervous 21-year-old holding his rifle like it might explode. "Name?" she asked. Bailey, ma'am." She nodded toward the range. "You see that wind flag?" "Yes." "Ignore it." Bailey blinked. "Ignore it." Flags lie, dust doesn't. He hesitated, following her gaze to the faint swirl of particles across the sand. "What's it telling you?" He swallowed. "Left to right drift, maybe 4 knots. 5, she corrected gently. "Good. Trust your eyes more than the fabric." She stood, looked at the line of shooters. "None of you fire until I say. This isn't about hitting the target. It's about learning what not to shoot." That caught the observers off guard. Murmurs rippled. The first target launched. A blur of steel. Dust exploded in its wake. Every instinct screamed, "Shoot." Nobody moved. "Wind's changing," Norah said quietly. "Wait for the pause, the moment between gusts. That's when physics holds its breath." The second passed. Then a lull, a perfect stillness. "Now." 6 rifles fired in near unison. 6 hits. The range erupted, applause, disbelief, even awe. But Norah's face stayed still. "This isn't accuracy," she said to no one in particular. "This is patience." Mason, standing behind her, smiled to himself. "That's range delta now," he whispered. "Patience over pride." That night, long after the dignitaries left, Norah returned to the memorial wall again. The desert was silent, moonlight stretching across the granite. She stood before Reed's name, her reflection faintly visible on the polished surface. "I think we're getting there," she said softly. "They're learning, they're seeing the wind." She traced the engraving with her fingertips, then stepped back. "I stopped carrying you," she whispered, "but I didn't stop hearing you." The wind blew, gentle, consistent, 5 knots northeast. Predictable, finally. In the days that followed, her schedule grew relentless. Morning training, midday briefings, night audits. Every detail mattered, every calculation had to hold. But sometimes, in the quiet between tasks, her thoughts drifted to the things math couldn't measure. Guilt, redemption, the cost of being right too late. She knew she couldn't undo the past, but she could change the precision of the future. That was her faith, not in God, not in luck, but in equations refined until they saved lives instead of ending them. A month later, Mason found her in the workshop again, head bent over a set of old ballistic models. "You're rewriting them?" he asked. "Not rewriting," she said, not looking up. "Refining. Truth isn't fixed, it's iterative." He chuckled. "You sound like a philosopher." "Engineers are just philosophers with better math," she replied. He studied her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You know, when you first asked to shoot, I thought you were trying to prove something." She finally looked up. "And now?" "Now I know you were trying to correct something." Norah gave a small nod. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The two stood there for a while, two people who'd seen too much, said too little, and finally found the language of silence again. Outside, the wind moved steadily, the kind that didn't need to shout to be felt. The kind you could measure. The kind you could trust. What happens when the system you built is tested by chaos? The answer came one pale morning, 4 weeks after the Defense Board's visit. Range Delta woke to alarms, not the blaring, red light kind, but the kind that whispered trouble through every radio channel. A convoy en route to a live-fire demonstration had gone dark halfway through its trial corridor. 3 armored trucks, 9 personnel, lost contact in the southern test zone, a barren valley known as the Sink. No live enemy, no combat zone, just a malfunctioning scenario. Or so everyone thought. At 5:20, Mason's call came through Norah's comm unit. "Hale, I need you in ops, now." Her boots hit the concrete in seconds. Inside the operations trailer, chaos hummed. Officers hovered over digital maps. A dozen feeds flickered static. A voice over radio shouted coordinates through crackling interference. Norah stepped in, calm as a metronome. "What happened?" Lieutenant Grant, now wearing the strained face of responsibility, turned toward her. "Training run. Automated target drones activated early. The convoy's GPS looped. They're stuck in crossfire. The system thinks it's live engagement." Mason swore under his breath. "How many rounds in those drones?" 2,000 each, sir." Norah's eyes narrowed. "They're using the Delta X predictive system." Grant nodded grimly. "Yes, the One West Annex built before your revision." Her heart sank. She knew those algorithms. "Reads models." "Sir," she said quickly, "that system uses static wind indexing. It doesn't adjust dynamically if the crosswind shifted." "The trajectory's off," Mason finished, realization dawning. "They're firing blind." Norah didn't waste another breath. "Get me on the comm net." The line hissed, filled with distortion. Finally, a voice broke through. "This is Convoy Alpha. Sensors offline, GPS looping, taking fire from automated units, coordinates unknown." Norah leaned over the mic, steady but urgent. "Alpha, this is range control. Hale. Do not engage, return fire. Repeat, do not engage. Identify your nearest wind flag or marker if visible." Static, then nothing visible. Wind is, hold, dust rising north to south. North to south. That meant the system's assumptions were reversed. Every drone was compensating the wrong way, firing into the error margin. She scribbled quickly in her notebook, fingers flying through equations. At 800 meters, a 5-knot reversal meant a drift differential of 0.6 mils right. That small miscalculation could turn precision fire into chaos. She hit the intercom. "Mason, we need to override the drones manually. Cut the predictive algorithm." He frowned. "That'll take 15 minutes to isolate." "They don't have 15. She turned to Grant. "You're with me." They sprinted across the compound, heading for the control tower overlooking the Sink. The wind hit hard, sharp gusts carrying grit and urgency. From the tower's top deck, the desert stretched endless and terrible. In the valley below, flashes of gunfire strobed through rising dust clouds. The automated drones, matte black and fast, moved like metallic predators circling prey. Through her binoculars, Norah spotted the convoy, 3 trucks pinned behind a shallow ridge. Tracers streaked overhead, each one a miscalculation made real. "Jesus," Grant whispered, "the system's killing them." Norah set her jaw. "No, the system's following orders, faulty orders." She grabbed the tower's manual targeting controls, the old analog override that predated automation. "We'll use counterfire beacons. Redirect the drone's focus." Grant hesitated. "That's a patch, not a fix." "It's a start." Her fingers flew over dials. Range input, wind correction, lead distance. She was reprogramming blind, converting observation into survival. Set beacon coordinates grid D17, she said. Wind 5 knots north to south, correction 0.6 mil left. Grant worked beside her, voice tight. If we get this wrong. We won't. She lined up the analog sights on an empty dune east of the valley. Beacon firing in 3-2. She flipped the switch. A flare streaked into the sky, trailing blue smoke, bright enough to be seen by the drone's sensors. Instantly, the nearest automaton veered, recalibrating. It pivoted hard and redirected fire toward the beacon. Got one, Grant said. 3 more to go. Down in the valley, the convoy commander's voice returned, frantic but alive. This is Alpha, drones diverting east, repeat east. Who the hell did that? Hail, Mason answered over comms, his tone caught between disbelief and admiration. Hold your position. We're working manual override. Through the haze, Norah could see movement, the trucks repositioning, using the lull to retreat toward a safer slope. But one drone still held position, targeting patterns stuck in recursive loop. It's not updating, Grant said. Old firmware. Then we do it ourselves. Norah set the next beacon manually, adjusting for terrain dip and temperature distortion. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. Reed had died because of a model like this, one that refused to adjust for reality. She wasn't about to let it happen again. The second flare launched. Dust plumed, drone sensors blinked. Then silence, no more fire. All units offline. The valley stilled. 30 minutes later, the convoy rolled back into base. Smoke-stained, shaken, but alive. When Norah descended from the tower, Mason was waiting. He didn't speak at first, just watched as she wiped dust and sweat from her face. Finally, he said, "You disobeyed my direct command." She looked up sharply. To wait, yes, because waiting would have killed them. He stared at her for a long time, then his expression softened. Good. Relief hit her harder than adrenaline. Grant, standing beside her, exhaled. The drones, they were running the old model, weren't they? Norah nodded. Reed's base code, the same one that failed him. Mason swore quietly. Someone reinstalled it for the demo. I'll find out who. Don't bother, Norah said. I already know. He frowned. Who? She held up a data chip she'd yanked from the tower's diagnostics. West Annex, contractor override. They were trying to prove the old code could still function. Mason's face hardened. They wanted your new model to fail. Norah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. By sunset, she was in the boardroom. The same defense contractors who'd applauded her a month ago now sat in polished suits, tense and defensive. The meeting began with one question, hers. Which of you reinstated Delta X code? No one spoke. 13 people died the last time those equations were trusted, she continued, voice controlled but sharp. Today, 9 almost joined them, who signed the reactivation. A man at the end of the table shifted uncomfortably. It was part of a cross-comparison study, he said. We wanted to test algorithm integrity. You wanted to see if you could outsmart the math, Norah interrupted. You can't. You only manipulate it until it agrees with your funding. Mason leaned forward. Answer the question, doctor. The man hesitated. I authorized it. Norah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Then you authorized the attempt to kill 9 people. Silence swallowed the room. Mason finally spoke, tone cold as steel. As of now, West Annex's access is suspended. Hale's model becomes operational law. Anyone attempting override faces criminal review. The contractor swallowed hard. You can't. Mason cut him off. I just did. After the meeting, Norah walked out into the evening air, exhaustion settling in her bones. The desert was cooling again, its harshness softening under the purple sky. Grant caught up to her, near the maintenance bay. "You saved them," he said simply. Norah shook her head. "No, the math did, I just listened." He frowned. "You always downplay it." "Because it's not heroism," she said quietly. "It's correction." They stopped near the wind flags, motion steady, predictable. "Reed would have been proud," Grant said. Norah looked toward the horizon. "Reed wouldn't care about pride. He'd care about the fix." That night, alone in her office, she stared at the brass casing sitting on her desk. It had once been a weight in her pocket. Now it was a reminder of standards, not sorrow. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. Across the top she wrote, "Field Report Operation Sync, Precision Under Pressure." Then line by line, she detailed the day, the failure, the adjustment, the human variables. She ended it with one quiet sentence. "The system corrected itself because we listened to the wind." She set the pen down, leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the valley again, same direction, same rhythm. But this time, it didn't sound like loss. It sounded like survival. Hours later, as the base slept, Mason stood at the memorial wall. The floodlights illuminated every engraved name. He glanced at Reed's, then at the empty space beside it where a new plate was being added, not for a casualty but a creed. Hail Protocol 2025. When in doubt, don't shoot. Precision is compassion. He touched the brass plaque gently. "You turned grief into guidance, Hale," he murmured. Behind him, the wind carried a faint echo, the sound of Norah's calm voice from earlier that day. "We don't control the system, we align with it." At dawn, Norah returned to the range. The air was still cold. Her students waited, tired but eager. She stood before them, notebook in hand. "No simulations today," she said. "We're learning something new." Grant raised a brow. "What's that?" "How to fail safely," Norah said. "Because success means nothing if you don't understand how it breaks." She turned to the horizon. The wind was building again, 5 knots, steady northeast. "Lesson 1," she said softly. "Always trust the silence between gusts." She smiled faintly. "That's when truth speaks." "What does it cost to tell the truth?" That question haunted Norah as she stood outside Colonel Mason's office 3 days after the sink incident. The base had gone back to its rhythms, drills, engine hums, the whine of wind through fencing, but beneath it all something felt wrong. Too quiet. Too careful. The kind of silence that comes before a storm of paperwork and politics. Inside the office, voices rose, firm, clipped, unfamiliar. She didn't have to enter to know who they were. West Annex representatives. The same men who almost got 9 people killed. When Mason's voice finally called, "Come in," she pushed the door open. 3 civilians in dark suits turned toward her, their expressions composed like masks. The kind of men who called tragedies operational miscalculations. Mason looked tired. Not angry, just aware he was standing in the middle of a battlefield that involved no weapons. The lead representative spoke first. "Ms. Hale, thank you for joining us." She didn't answer, just nodded once. "We're here," the man continued, "to review your unilateral decision to override automated control systems during the sink incident." Norah folded her arms. "You mean my decision to stop them from killing our people?" The man smiled thinly. "With all due respect, your methods disrupted a controlled experiment." Mason slammed his pen down. "Controlled? You call live ammunition chewing through a convoy controlled?" The man's composure didn't crack. "Colonel, we're not here to debate hypotheticals. We're here to ensure protocol remains in qualified hands." Norah took a slow breath. "Qualified hands built the system that failed. I fixed it." The man adjusted his tie. "You overstepped your clearance. The Range Delta technical doctrine does not authorize field overrides by civilian consultants." Mason opened his mouth, but Norah cut him off, calm, surgical. Then change the doctrine. The table fell silent. Her tone wasn't defiant. It was factual, almost gentle, the way someone might describe a simple equation. Mason leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly as if realizing she wasn't fighting for power. She was defending precision. "Ms. Hale," said another representative, a woman this time, polished, deliberate. "You're clearly capable. No one disputes that. But there are channels for these actions. We cannot allow individuals to make ethical judgments that override authorized algorithms." Norah looked at her. "Why not?" The woman blinked. "Because it undermines trust in the system." "The system," Norah said softly, "was wrong. And you think human intuition is better." "No," Norah said, "I think human conscience is." The words landed heavier than she intended. The kind of line that ends up quoted later, stripped of context. But she meant it, every syllable. By the end of the meeting, the conclusion was already written between the lines. The board would review her position. Mason would cooperate. West Annex would temporarily suspend all integration tests. In bureaucratic language, that meant one thing: a quiet burial. When the room cleared, Mason closed the door, rubbing a hand over his face. "They're coming for your protocol, Hale," he said quietly. "They want it shelved under review." Norah exhaled, leaning against the wall. "Of course they do. You can't sell humility." Mason chuckled bitterly. "They can sell failure, though. It's expensive." Silence lingered. Then she said, "If they shut me down, they'll reinstall Delta X, you know that, right?" He nodded. "I know." "Then it happens again," she said simply. "Maybe not today, maybe not here, but it happens." Mason didn't argue. He didn't have to. He'd seen the sync incident firsthand, seen what happened when people trusted machines more than math. "Whatever happens," he said finally, "you've changed this place. Even if they strip your title, the people here won't unlearn what you taught them." Norah gave a small nod. "Then that's enough." But her eyes said something else. It wasn't enough. Not while truth could still be overwritten by convenience. That night she sat in her office, the brass casing glinting faintly under lamplight. The data files from the sync operation were open on her monitor, lines of code, environmental readings, error reports. She scrolled through each one, cross-referencing variables, documenting discrepancies. Every false input, every unaccounted gust, every reason a person almost died. She wasn't angry. She was clinical, focused, like Reed used to be before the mission that took him. Hours slipped by unnoticed. At 02:17, she saved the final document under a single name. "The Wind Never Lies, Internal Audit Report." And then she sent it. Not to Mason. Not to the board. To the Defense Oversight Network, the one that couldn't be silenced. The fallout hit within 48 hours. Emails, calls, investigators. By the third morning, Range Delta was under external audit. The same West Annex representatives who once smiled through their lies were now being escorted off base. The same reporters who'd come to film her training sessions were back, cameras rolling, chasing controversy this time. And through it all, Norah said nothing. When journalists tried to corner her outside the range gate, she only replied, "I'm not the story, the math is." That night the sky above Range Delta looked different. Storm clouds gathered rare for the desert. The wind came strong and unpredictable, hissing through fences and railings. Norah stood alone on the tower platform, staring out at the dark horizon. She'd done what Reed never got to. She'd forced truth into daylight. But the cost was still unfolding. Footsteps approached. Mason again, no uniform jacket this time, just fatigue and quiet pride. "They're calling you a whistleblower," he said. She smirked faintly. Let them. They're also calling you a liability. Truth usually is. He leaned against the railing beside her. The wind whipped his voice away in fragments. You know they'll try to move you. Transfer desk duty, maybe even termination. That's how they bury people like you politely. Norah nodded slowly. Then they can bury me in the truth. I'm fine with that. Mason studied her profile, eyes fixed on the valley where the sink incident had played out. You're a hard woman to protect, Hale. I'm not asking you to. I know. They stood there in silence, wind snapping the flags below. The storm rolled closer, lightning flickering behind the mountain ridge. After a while, Mason said, You ever think about leaving all this behind? Going civilian again? Nora's eyes didn't move from the horizon. Every day. And why don't you? She smiled, a quiet, tired thing. Because if people like me leave, people like them get to rewrite the reports. By dawn, the storm had broken. Rain swept across Range Delta for the first time in months, washing dust from the rails, cleaning the memorial wall. Norah walked the perimeter in the downpour, her jacket soaked, boots sinking into mud. She stopped by the spot where she'd first found that track divot months ago, the imperfection that had revealed everything. The rain had filled it now, turning it into a shallow pool. She crouched, fingers tracing the edge. Perfect systems don't exist. Only ones that admit when they're wrong. She stood again, the rain cold against her skin, and whispered into the wind. We fixed it, Reed, one equation at a time. Later that morning, Mason called her to the command trailer again. He was sitting at his desk, a rare smile tugging at his mouth. Got something for you, he said, sliding a folder across the table. The header, Department of Defense, Permanent Technical Advisory Appointment. Norah blinked. You're kidding. Nope, they tried to bury you. The Oversight Committee decided to promote you instead. Her eyes scanned the page. She was being assigned as Chief Advisor, Ballistics and Environmental Systems, National Range Integration Command. It was more than a title. It was the authority to rewrite doctrine, not for one base, but for every range in the country. Looks like they couldn't argue with your math, Mason said. Norah sat back, exhaling. They'll still try. Of course, Mason said. That's how we know we're right. She smiled faintly. You realize this doesn't fix everything. It doesn't have to, he said. It just keeps the next read alive. The next few weeks were a blur, briefings, system audits, integration meetings. Norah found herself moving between military ranges, talking less about equations and more about philosophy. She didn't preach. She didn't demand. She just explained. When you measure wind, she told trainees, you're not fighting it, you're aligning with it. That's the same with truth. You can't control it, you can only account for it. Some listened, some rolled their eyes. But the seed was planted. Across facilities, she started seeing her words appear, scrawled on whiteboards, taped to equipment racks. Precision is compassion. When in doubt, don't shoot. And she knew this was how revolutions actually started. Not with explosions, but with quiet math written in the margins. One night, weeks later, she found herself back at Range Delta, standing in her old maintenance shed. Everything looked smaller now, the tools, the bench, even the note still taped to the wall. Measure twice, lead once. She smiled at it. You held up pretty well. The door creaked open behind her. Grant stepped in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. You're a hard person to find these days, he said. Not really, she said, just harder to ignore. He grinned. I heard you're rewriting the National Manual. Rewriting? No, correcting. They clinked their cups. Steam rose between them, carrying the scent of burnt coffee and new beginnings. Grant, she said softly, remember what I told you the first day. about listening to the wind. He nodded. Yeah, you said the silence between gusts is when truth speaks. She smiled faintly. Keep listening, even when I'm not here to remind you. He frowned slightly. You're leaving again. Not leaving, she said, expanding. When she stepped outside, the desert air was cool. The wind moved gentle this time, not defiant, just steady. The base lights shimmered across the sand, like constellations that hadn't been named yet. And Norah Hale, the quiet woman they once laughed at, walked through them like someone who had rewritten gravity. She reached the memorial wall one last time. The brass casing was still there, polished by rain. Her reflection caught in its surface, calm, unbroken. Sometimes, she whispered, the loudest thing you can do is refuse to look away. She touched Reed's name. Then she turned, walking into the wind that now moved predictably, measured, understood, earned. And somewhere deep inside that wind, she could almost hear a voice, his voice soft, approving. You did it right this time, Hale. What happens when your principles start to outgrow you? Norah Hale never wanted a movement. She wanted math that didn't kill people. But months after the sink incident, her doctrine, precision is compassion, had spread farther than she ever expected. Field manuals carried her annotations. Training videos quoted her without credit. Even recruits she'd never met spoke of Hale correction like it was a law of physics. At first, she thought it was good. Then she saw what they were doing with it. It started small. At Range Sierra in Nevada, a young instructor bragged on camera that his shooters never miss because we only take humane shots now. The word humane made her flinch. As if killing, with enough precision, could be noble. At Range Theta, a defense PR video showcased a new initiative, the Hale Protocol Ethics Through Firepower. They'd plastered her phrase on a billboard, next to the image of a drone. A drone, the very technology she'd fought to make accountable. By the third incident, she'd stopped watching. The truth was being repackaged into slogans, stripped of its weight, sold for recruitment numbers. When Mason called one night, his tone said everything before his words did. They're distorting it, she murmured. Yeah, he said. Every doctrine gets corrupted once it works too well. They forget who bled for it. Norah stared out the window of her temporary quarters, the lights of Range Theta glowing like false stars across the desert. They're turning restraint into marketing, she whispered. They'll turn anything into marketing, Mason said, even grief. Silence. Then Mason added softly, you coming back to Delta anytime soon? She hesitated. I don't know, she said honestly. Feels like the math spreading faster than I can correct it. He chuckled. Then maybe it's time you stop correcting and start leading. Norah didn't reply. She didn't see herself as a leader. Leaders shouted. She calculated. But Mason wasn't wrong. If she didn't reclaim her own message soon, someone else would rewrite it entirely. 2 weeks later, the department summoned her to Washington. A closed-door ethics panel. 5 generals, 2 civilian directors, and 1 empty chair waiting for her. When she walked in, the air was too cold, the silence too thick. General Devereaux, the chairman, didn't waste time. Ms. Hale, your precision doctrine has become standard in 7 national ranges. Results are promising, fewer errors, better discipline. But there are concerns. Concerns, Norah repeated. Reports, said a woman at the far end of the table, of delayed engagement in active operations. Soldiers hesitating in combat situations, citing Hale's rules. Norah's heart sank. What kind of delay? She asked. In one case, the general said, a sniper team held fire for 6 seconds to confirm wind drift on a moving target. The delay cost a civilian's life. The words hit her like recoil. She didn't respond immediately. Her mind replayed the math. 6 seconds, Enough time to save a life, enough time to lose one. I never told anyone to hesitate, she said finally. I told them to understand. The general leaned forward. Intent doesn't matter when outcomes bleed. Norah took a slow breath. With respect, sir, that's not what happened. Hesitation isn't the enemy. Recklessness is. If they hesitated, it's because they were thinking. That's what we trained them to do. Another officer cut in. With respect, Miss Hale, soldiers who think too long don't come home. She looked around the table, all those eyes trained on her like gun barrels. And she realized they didn't want correction. They wanted control. She stood. Then you should ask yourselves why you built systems that only work when people stop thinking. The room went still. Her voice had stayed calm, but the weight of it was unmistakable. General Devereux cleared his throat. That will be all, Miss Hale. She turned to leave, pausing only once at the door. You can rewrite my doctrine, she said. You can even discredit me, but you can't make the wind stop moving. Then she walked out. Back at Range Delta, Mason met her with a look that said he already knew. They called me, he said. They want to review your field authority again. Let them, she replied. If they can't handle patience, they'll relearn the hard way. Mason sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You realize this could end your career. She looked past him toward the range. Then maybe it was never a career, she said softly. Maybe it was just a correction. The next morning, something unexpected happened. When Norah arrived at the firing line, the entire training crew was already there. Grant stood at the front, alongside half a dozen new recruits. On the table in front of them sat a plaque, handmade, rough around the edges. Burned into the wood were the words, Hail Protocol, for those who waited to be sure. Norah froze. Grant stepped forward. We heard what they said about you, ma'am, about your rules getting people killed. We don't buy it. We're here because hesitation saved us at the sink. She didn't know what to say. Mason stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching her reaction with quiet pride. This isn't rebellion, Grant said. It's gratitude. Norah's throat tightened. She wasn't good with speeches, but she found her words anyway. Listen to me, she said quietly. I don't want loyalty. I want accuracy. Don't follow me, follow the math. Follow the moment that tells you to think before you act. If that saves one life, it's worth more than all the medals in this place. They nodded. Nobody clapped. Nobody needed to. That night, a letter arrived. Anonymous sender, no insignia. Inside, a single page. Your doctrine makes soldiers second-guess orders. We can't afford doubt. You're dismantling what keeps this country safe. At the bottom, no signature, just an emblem she didn't recognize. A private defense contractor, maybe. Or worse, someone off the books. She folded the note carefully, slid it into a folder and marked it with one word. Predictable. Mason found her later, still at her desk. They'll come harder next time, he said. She looked up at him calm. Then I'll aim truer. Weeks passed. The scrutiny intensified, briefings, audits, endless interviews about ethical responsibility in automated warfare. They wanted her to say it. They wanted her to apologize. But Norah didn't. She kept showing up to the range, kept training her students, kept refining the doctrine that had already saved more lives than any policy in decades. And quietly, something began to change. Young recruits started quoting her lines not as slogans, but as reflections. Commanders requested her field lectures. Even the oversight board began drafting revisions that bore her logic, even if her name wasn't attached. Her philosophy had gone from whisper to undercurrent, a quiet rebellion inside a machine that thought itself perfect. One evening, she found Mason sitting alone in the observation tower, a glass of coffee gone cold beside him. Thought you quit caffeine, she said. He smirked. This isn't coffee, it's defiance. She smiled faintly and sat beside him. Below them, the range was silent, the last rays of sunset stretching across the sand. Remember when they said a quiet woman couldn't lead? He asked. I wasn't leading, she said. I was recalibrating. Mason chuckled. You know, sometimes I think the math listens to you. She looked at him serious. No, the math listens to whoever's willing to admit they're wrong. They sat in silence a while longer. Then Mason spoke softly. What if they take it all away again, Hale? What if they erase your work completely? She thought about it for a moment. Then she said, then it means they learned from it, because you only erase what you're afraid will be remembered. Mason nodded slowly, absorbing her words like someone collecting ammunition for the future. Later that night, the power flickered across Range Delta. A systems update had triggered automatic recalibration, unscheduled. Norah frowned at the alert on her screen. She checked the system logs. Something was wrong. The new update wasn't hers. It was a different branch, one she'd never approved. Delta X restoration module active. Her pulse quickened. Someone was trying to reinstall the old code, again. She slammed the comm line. Control, this is Hale, who authorized the firmware update. Static, no response. She grabbed her jacket, sprinting toward the control bunker. Inside, the hum of servers filled the air. Lights flashed erratically across consoles. A technician turned, startled. Ms. Hale, ma'am, we're just running. She cut him off. Kill the update now. But it's... now. He froze, then obeyed. Fingers flew across keys. The update halted, 97% complete. Norah leaned over the monitor, reading the subroutines. West Annex's signature again, embedded in the patch, disguised as performance optimization. Mason appeared in the doorway, breathless. You found it. Almost, she said, but they're learning, they're adapting. He stepped closer. Then what do we do? She turned to him, her face lit by the glow of failing code. We remind them why perfection doesn't exist. And with that, she pulled the drive, severing the system mid-process. The lights dimmed, then stabilized. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the servers sighed, a mechanical exhale. Mason looked at her, half smiling. You realize what you just did. Stopped a ghost, she said. Reed and theirs. By morning, the sabotage report was already filed. The update attempt had failed. The doctrine held. And somewhere in Washington, behind clean desks and polished smiles, someone realized that Norah Hale was no longer just a consultant. She was a variable they couldn't control. That night, she walked the firing line alone, tracing her fingers along the steel rails that hummed with history. Her breath came slow in the cold air. She thought of Reed. She thought of the soldiers who'd hesitated, who'd been told hesitation was weakness. And she whispered, not to the wind this time, but to herself. Doubt isn't weakness, it's awareness. The wind moved softly through her hair, as if agreeing. In the command center, Mason watched her through the window, that solitary figure standing against the night, illuminated by the range lights. He murmured to himself, quiet woman in the back, huh? And for the first time, he laughed quietly, with the weight of years lifting. How do you know when you've finally done enough? Norah Hale had asked herself that question 1,000 times, after Reed, after the sink, after every quiet victory that felt more like survival than triumph. But she never found an answer. Not until the morning the range went dark. It was 4:37 hours when the alarm started. Not drills. Not system tests. Real. Range Delta was under lockout, network intrusion detected, control override initiated. The screens flickered, every feed cut to black except one, the live targeting array overlooking the southern perimeter. Mason was already there when she arrived. "Hale," he said, "it's not local. This is remote control. Someone's in our system." "How bad?" "Bad," he said grimly. "They've activated live-fire drones on standby mode." Her blood ran cold. Standby to what? He hesitated. Engagement protocol. She looked at the display. Rows of autonomous turrets, each armed with real munitions, shifting online one by one. It was the old Delta X system again, the same ghost code she'd killed weeks ago. "How is that possible?" she whispered. "They didn't install it here," Mason said. "They hijacked it from Range Sierra, cross-networked us through a shadow relay. Someone wants a demonstration." Norah stared at the screen. A demonstration of what? Mason met her eyes. Of how much they still own. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The hum of the servers sounded like a heartbeat. Then Norah stepped forward. "Give me access," she said. "Hale, it's not stable." "Neither are we. Access." Mason hesitated, then keyed in the override. Her hands flew across the console, fingers steady, eyes tracking code lines faster than speech could keep up. She wasn't fighting a person anymore. She was fighting a philosophy, one that believed precision was power, not protection. "Whoever's doing this," she said, "they're routing through a dead satellite band. That's how they're hiding." "Can you trace it?" She paused. "Maybe, but first we stop the guns." Downrange, the turrets began to swivel, their sensors locking onto motion. At the far end of the field, a maintenance crew scrambled for cover. "Those are our people," Mason barked into his comm. "Pull them out." Static answered him. The system had jammed local frequencies. Norah didn't flinch. "Manual override won't hold. We need a hardware disruption." "You mean a bullet," Mason said. "Exactly." He frowned. "We don't even know where the signal hub is." She tapped a map overlay. "We don't, but the wind does." She grabbed her rifle from the rack, the same one she hadn't touched since her demonstration months ago. It was clean, balanced, exact. She checked the chamber, sight, scope alignment, everything muscle memory. Mason watched her gear up. "You're not serious." "I'm not letting them turn my doctrine into a weapon," she said simply. He looked at her for a long second, then nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." She shook her head. "Not this time." "Why?" "Because if this goes wrong, someone has to make sure it still means something." Outside, the dawn was bleeding into gray. Wind whipped across the range, unpredictable, strong. Norah crouched behind a ridgeline, scanning the horizon. The turrets were active now, sweeping the perimeter like mechanical sentries. Between their intervals, she spotted it. A single relay mast glinting on the far hill, barely visible through heat haze. That was the hub, the signal anchor, the source. She exhaled, adjusting her scope. Distance, 1,190 meters. Wind, variable, cross 9 knots gusting to 14. Elevation, minus 2.3 mils. Impossible shot, for anyone who hadn't learned to listen to silence. Her heartbeat slowed. Not control. Alignment. She could almost hear Reed's voice. "You don't beat the wind, you dance with it." The turrets rotated again. She waited, breath held, stillness in her bones. Then between the gusts came the gap, that fragile pause when everything held its breath. She fired. The shot cracked the air like a whisper turned into thunder. Through the scope she saw the relay mast spark, then bloom into smoke. The turrets froze mid-rotation. One by one, their red sensors flicked to dead gray. Silence. Then cheers from the control tower. The range had gone still again. She lowered the rifle, hands trembling only now that it was over. Her radio crackled, Mason's voice raw, laughing, almost disbelieving. "You did it, Hale. You saved them." Norah looked at the rising sun and said softly, "No, we corrected it." Later that day, investigators flooded the base. They called it a cyber event. They called her actions situational heroics. They called Mason's leadership commendable. They called everything but what it really was, a test. Because this wasn't about the code. It was about whether humanity could still matter inside a machine. By evening, Norah sat on the tower roof again, her rifle beside her, boots crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. The base lights flickered on below, soldiers moving, systems resetting, life returning to normal. Mason climbed up the ladder carrying 2 mugs. "You ever sleep?" She smiled faintly, "Only when the equations do." He handed her the mug. "They're saying you saved a dozen lives today." She shook her head. "The wind did most of the work." He laughed softly. "You really believe that?" "I believe," she said, "that nature doesn't lie, people do, machines do, but not the wind." They sat quietly for a moment, listening. After a while, Mason said, "What are you going to do now? You've already fixed more systems than most engineers see in a lifetime." Norah looked toward the valley, thoughtful. "Maybe I'll build one that can't be hijacked." He raised a brow. "Is that even possible?" She smiled. "No, but it's worth trying." Days passed. The inquiry cleared her reluctantly. The official report credited field initiative, not philosophy. No mention of precision is compassion. No mention of the doctrine she'd bled for. And yet everywhere she went, she saw traces of it. In the training fields, in the logs of new simulation systems, in the way soldiers paused before pulling the trigger. The world had absorbed her lesson quietly, like wind carving rock. On her final day at Range Delta, Norah packed slowly. The brass casing went into her jacket pocket again, not as guilt, but as proof of learning. Her notebook, filled with equations and thoughts, stayed behind. She left it on the table, open to one final page. It read, "The goal was never to make perfect shots. It was to make honest ones." As she walked out toward the flight pad, the air felt heavy with memory. Grant and Mason stood waiting by the transport. "You're really leaving?" Grant asked. Norah nodded, "For now." "Where to?" "Somewhere quieter," she said, "where people listen to the wind instead of command it." Mason smiled. "You'll be back." She shrugged. "Maybe, if the math asks me to." He extended his hand. "For what it's worth, Hale, they'll never replace you." She took his hand, firm and brief. "They're not supposed to." When she reached the tarmac, she turned once, looking back at Range Delta. The flags along the perimeter fluttered steady and sure, the same 5-knot pattern she'd learned to trust. She smiled. For the first time in years, she felt still. She climbed into the transport, the door closing behind her with a hollow thud. Engines roared to life. The aircraft lifted slowly, desert shrinking below. Through the small window, she watched the range fade into dust and sun. A place once built for killing, now learning how to breathe. Halfway through the flight, the pilot's voice broke over the intercom. "Ma'am, we're clear to exit the test corridor. You're free to relax." Norah looked out again, endless desert, endless horizon. The kind of silence she'd been chasing all her life. And she thought, maybe this is what peace sounds like, not quiet, but alignment. She closed her eyes. The hum of the engines blended with the whisper of memory, Reed's voice, Mason's laughter, the wind through Range Delta's fences. And somewhere in that mix of sound and silence, a single truth remained. Precision was never about aim. It was about intent. The measure of a soldier wasn't their target. It was their restraint. Months later, a letter arrived at Range Delta. No return address. Inside, a single brass casing, polished to mirror sheen. On it 3 words were etched. "When in doubt." and below it smaller, finer, as if carved by wind. "Don't shoot." At the memorial wall, Mason placed the casing next to Reed's name. He stood there for a long time, hat in hand, watching the morning light dance across the metal. The wind moved again, soft, consistent, familiar. It brushed across the plaque, over the range, and through the air like a promise kept. Somewhere far away, maybe on another base, maybe in another life. A quiet woman adjusted her scope, closed one eye and smiled faintly. She didn't need to pull the trigger anymore. The world was finally listening. And in the hush between gusts, you could almost hear her voice, low, steady, unshaken. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.